In my previous life, Blake was a young and promising military region commander with outstanding military achievements. And I, an ordinary person, was merely fortunate enough to become his wife due to a marriage contract made in childhood. When the kidnappers pointed guns at both me and Violet, without hesitation, Blake chose to save her. As for me, I was shot through the heart and died at the age of 27. In this life, I took the initiative to divorce him, set him free, and went to the other side of the world to start working in international medical aid. But he was filled with remorse as if he had lost his soul, blocking my way and begging me to give him another chance. Aurora, are you really sure you've thought this through? The battlefield conditions are harsh, and you'll be facing life-threatening dangers at any time. I nodded firmly. Professor Hudson. Don't worry. I've thought it over carefully. He sighed, adjusted his glasses and took out an agreement from the drawer, handing it to me. This is the agreement of the International Medical Aid Team. Once you sign it, you can't go back on your word. Someone will come to pick you up and leave in a month. I signed the agreement and walked out of Professor Hudson's office. Looking down at my slightly bulging belly, I was a bit dazed for a moment. In my previous life, I married Blake at the age of 20. He was far away in the military, and I took care of his parents and our daughter at home by myself. Later, he brought back a young woman. He said, "This is Violet. I owe her my life. She's the benefactor of our whole family. Aurora, you should treat her well." Violet was beautiful, gentle, and highly capable at work. Blake found her a job as his secretary. The two of them were together every day, and those who didn't know the truth thought they were a couple and praised them as a perfect match. Blake's father and mother were also charmed by her and were extremely happy. One day after dinner, while I was washing the dishes in the kitchen, I accidentally saw Blake's mother patting her hand and praising, "If only Violet were my daughter-in-law. You and Blake are really well matched. It's just that your fate brought you together a bit late." Violet gave a charming smile and looked in my direction triumphantly. Even our daughter became her loyal fan and believed that I was no match for her in any way. She once shouted at me in a fit of rage, "What era is this? Arranged marriages are out of date. You and Dad shouldn't be together. You're not worthy of him." She mumbled, "I wish Aunt Violet were my mom." Later, Violet and I were kidnapped by Blake's enemy at the same time. After he arrived, the kidnapper told him he could only take one person away. With a gunshot, my heart was hit. As I lay in a pool of blood, in my last sight, I saw him unhesitatingly protecting Violet behind him. Pulling my thoughts back, I placed my hands on my belly. It was now 2 months since I was pregnant. Since she didn't want me to be her mother, I would fulfill her wish in this life. I went to the hospital. When the doctor learned that I wanted to abort the child, he tried to persuade me. But seeing my firm attitude, he had to give up. In this life, I won't let anyone in Blake's family become a stumbling block to my new life. It wouldn't be long before Blake brought Violet back. I stayed in the hospital for 2 days before returning to Blake's home. Blake's mother asked me where I had been, and I made an excuse that I was intern at the hospital with my teacher. She said unhappily, "You're married now. You should stay at home and take good care of us. Don't always think about running to the hospital. What's the use of what you learn? You can't possibly become a doctor anyway." A woman's virtue lies in her ignorance. But I clearly remembered that she didn't say this about Violet. A few days later, just like in the previous life, Blake brought Violet back. Instead of waiting for him at home as before, I went to the hospital. When I got home, it was dinner time. Today was New Year's Eve. In the past, I was the one who made all the arrangements. But this year, since they couldn't reach me, Blake's mother had also prepared a sumptuous dinner. "You finally remember to come back?" Blake's mother gave me an unhappy look. Seeing this, Blake's father whispered beside her, "Sit down and eat." I sat next to Blake, feeling mostly indifferent inside. He pointed at Violet and introduced her to me. "This is Violet, my savior." I nodded and picked up my chopsticks, ready to eat. Aurora, Violet doesn't know anyone here, so she needs to stay with us for the time being. In the future, you should treat her well." I picked up a piece of braised pork and put it in my bowl. And looked up to meet his eyes. Blake, naden thilthildlayad sai. Don't trouble her aura. From now on, I'll take care of everyone. Don't you know my abilities? I'll take good care of uncle and aunt. Don't worry. She gave Blake a playful smile. Oh. You're such a sweet talking girl. The more I look at you, the more I like you. Come on. Have some more fish. Aunt, I bought it specially for you today. With that, Blake's mother picked up a piece of fish and stuffed it into Violet's bowl. Blake quickly stopped her. Mom. Violet doesn't eat coriander. Blake's mother looked down and saw a bit of coriander on the fish. Oh. Oh, then you eat this piece. I'll pick another one for Violet. Watching how harmonious they were. Like a real family. I felt that I was really out of place here. Blake might have sensed something and picked a shrimp from the dishes on the table and put it in my bowl. Aurora. I'm often not at home. Thank you for taking care of the family and my parents this year. This shrimp was cooked by me. Try it. I stared at the shrimp in the bowl without moving. Then looked at him, finding it really ridiculous. Seeing that I didn't move, he was stunned. What's wrong? Blake, I'm allergic to shrimp. Don't you know that? Hearing this, he was shocked. Blake's mother broke the silence. There's no such nonsense about being allergic or not. People in the past couldn't even get to eat it if they wanted to. Don't spoil everyone's mood during the new year. At this moment, Blake's mother seemed like a different person from the one who had treated Violet just now. Such obvious differential treatment. Yet in my previous life, I had worked hard and endured humiliation for this man. Blake, without a low sigh. Taking care of his sick mother for 5 years. I must have been crazy. I threw down my chopsticks, stood up, and stared at Blake's mother, saying word by word, Mom, if you're uneducated, I can teach you. You clearly know someone is allergic to a certain food, but you still force her to eat it. If it leads to a severe shock, it counts as attempted murder. Aurora, how dare you talk to your mother like that? Blake's father, who had been pretending to be invisible, finally couldn't hold it in and shouted at me. Apologize to your mother right now. I laughed. My mother? Where is my mother? My mother has been dead for a long time. Oh, and if I remember correctly, she died trying to save you. After saying this, Blake's father looked dazed for a moment. Then sat down without saying anything. I didn't want to deal with them and turned to leave. Suddenly, my wrist was grabbed by Blake. Aurora. Apologize. He was angry. I forcefully shook him off and looked straight into his eyes. What? Have you really taken me as a slave in your family over time? How long has New China been founded? Did the reform and opening up forget to include your family? Suddenly, shocked gazes came towards me. In the past, I was always submissive to them and had never been like this before. I was just too angry and felt that my past efforts were not worth it. I wasn't surprised by their shocked expressions. I ignored them, left the table directly, and went back to my room. A few hours later, it was quiet outside, and there was a knock on the door of my room. I got up and opened the door. Blake was standing at the door. He handed me a glass of milk. Aurora. I just heated this milk. Have some. No need. You drink it. With that, I was about to close the door. He reached out to block the door and looked at me helplessly. Don't be petty. You need to take good care of your body for the sake of the baby in your belly. Today, we were too much. I apologize to you. Hearing him mention the baby, I looked down at my now flat belly and forced a bitter smile. Blake, there are fireworks outside. Will you accompany me to set them off? Violet jumped out from behind him, excitedly pointing at the fireworks outside and acting cautiously towards him. Blake paused, then nodded gently to her. Okay. I'll take you to set off the fireworks. Violet got the answer she wanted and happily put on her coat, ready to go out. Blake suddenly turned around when he was about to reach the door. Aurora, do you want to come with us? Violet tugged at his sleeve reluctantly and mumbled. Blake, I'd unfulfilled my obsession. It's better not to take her aura. She's pregnant now. What if the fireworks outside explode near her? He looked at me in a dilemma and agreed. You're right. I shook my head. You guys go and have fun. I saw a hint of guilt on his face. Then you rest at home. Mom said you should have a prenatal checkup. I'll accompany you tomorrow morning. Before I could answer, he was impatiently dragged out of the door by Violet. Prenatal checkup? Huh. Back in the room, I received a message from Professor Hudson. Aurora, I've reported your name. You'll join the medical rescue team in Moritz in half a month. It's winter there now, so you need to prepare some warm clothes in case of emergencies. The next day, I rarely slept until 10 o'clock. When I opened the door, there was no one at home. I casually found something to eat and then prepared to go to the mall to buy a down jacket for myself. After receiving Professor Hudson's text message yesterday, I went to look through my wardrobe and found that I hadn't bought myself a few clothes in all these years. In the past, I felt sorry for him having to earn money. So I spent almost all the living expenses he gave me on household needs and rarely bought anything for myself. Thinking about it now, I was really stupid. At noon, I took a taxi to the mall and headed straight for the counter. But as soon as I entered, I heard an exclamation. This dress is so beautiful. I looked over and saw Violet and Blake. They were still wearing the same clothes as yesterday. Violet was holding a lace-trimmed body-hugging dress against her body, comparing it. Blake, does it look good on me? Blake nodded. It looks good. Violet said shyly. Is it too expensive? It costs more than 8,000 yuan. Blake smiled, took out his bank card from his pocket, and handed it to the salesperson. Wrap it up for me. Please. The salesperson took the card with a big smile and praised Violet. Your husband is so good to you. All of this fell into my eyes. I suddenly remembered that from the time I met him until now, he seemed to have never given me anything. It was not until he finished paying the bill and turned around to see me at the door that his smile instantly froze on his face. Aurora, why are you here? In an instant, I suddenly felt like teasing him. I raised my hand to look at my watch. Didn't you say you'd accompany me to the prenatal checkup? You didn't come home all night. So I had to come out and look for you myself. His face instantly turned pale. He anxiously explained. Don't misunderstand. It was very late after we set off the fireworks last night. We were afraid of disturbing you when we went back. So we stayed out for the night. Yeah, behan faciled my absa. Aurora, don't think too much about it. Violet echoed. I glanced at the dress in her hand. This dress is an employment gift from Blake. Blake found me a job to be his assistant when I came back. Aurora, you don't mind, do you? How could I not hear the provocation in her words? I smiled. Of course not. You're his benefactor. So it's only natural. Hearing this, Blake smiled at me gratifyingly. Aurora, I knew you'd understand. I looked at him and found it ridiculous. I'll send Violet back first, and then accompany you to the hospital. When we arrived at the mall parking lot, Violet walked straight to the front passenger seat. She opened the car door and sat in it skillfully. Blake started the engine. Seeing that I hadn't gotten in the car yet, he shouted at me. Get in the car. I glanced at the things piled up in the back seat. He was stunned for a moment, then got up in a hurry to clean it up. Oops. I forgot Blake bought me so many things. The back seat is full. I told him I didn't need so many. But he still thought I lacked this and that. Sometimes I really can't argue with him. Violet seemed to be complaining, but was actually showing off to me. For a moment, even I felt a bit dazed. Among us, was I the redundant third wheel? After Blake finished cleaning up, he stood in front of me, looking a bit embarrassed. Aurora, after the prenatal checkup later, I'll accompany you to buy some things too. It's the new year, and you should get some new stuff. I didn't know if he said this out of guilt or for some other reason, but I wasn't touched at all. I opened the car door and got in. Let's go back. On the way, Violet kept chattering non-stop, occasionally heading to Felbrand session. She was made to laugh heartily by Blake. Then, let out a low sigh. Suddenly realizing I was still in the back, she would awkwardly stop smiling. They talked about things that only the two of them had experienced, leaving me out of the conversation. When passing by the city's amusement park, she said, Blake let out a low sigh. Do you remember when we first met? I told you I'd never been to an amusement park, and you said you'd take me there someday. Blake was holding the steering wheel, but he still turned his head to nod at her. Okay. I'll take you there when I'm free. Blake. I also want to go mountain climbing and see the sunrise on the Jinshan mountain. Okay. I'll go with you. Blake let out a low sigh. I want to eat roast duck tonight. Okay. I'll buy it for you tonight. At this moment, I realized. So Blake was such a gentle and considerate person. I had never seen or known this side of him before. Thinking about the reasons I had come up with for his coldness towards me in the past, I just felt slapped in the face. Every word they said seemed to be mocking me for being a joke sitting there. Violet turned around from the front seat and pretended to be apologetic. Aurora. I'm sorry. I forgot you were here. This is how Blake and I usually get along. Don't mind. When we got home, Blake's father and mother had already returned. Seeing me, Blake's mother scolded. You're a pregnant woman. Yet you're still running around all day. It might be okay if something happens to you, but don't let anything happen to my precious grandson. Blake's father also chimed in. Aurora. I think you should give up being a doctor. You're just not cut out for it. From now on, just stay at home, take good care of the child, and Blake, don't make a fuss. Blake was changing his shoes at the door and echoed. Yeah. Aurora. Listen to Mom and Dad. Don't go to the hospital. Women don't need to work. I stared at Violet behind him and asked. Oh? Then why did you find a job for Violet? He was stunned for a moment and then replied. Violet is different from you. She's more independent. And her job as my assistant allows her to be with me all the time. What if I become your assistant? As soon as I said this, everyone present was stunned, with different expressions on their faces. What? We're husband and wife. Isn't it more reasonable for me to be your assistant and be with you every day? Aurora. Don't be silly. Blake said helplessly. Silly? Am I the one being silly? Aurora. Are you angry with Blake because of me? If you dislike me so much, I'll leave. Violet, who had been quiet, suddenly started crying. After saying that, she bent down to pick up her bag and was about to leave. Blake and his mother quickly stopped her. Violet. Don't go. Blake, I can't break up your family. I know she hates me. I'll just leave. Aurora doesn't mean that. Right? Blake held her and turned to look at me, waiting for me to nod in agreement. I smiled. That's exactly what I mean. Blake, guy. Either Violet or I can stay in this house. His hand froze. He looked at me in surprise. His tone was disappointed. What's wrong with you? You weren't like this before. I didn't want to waste any more words with him. Blake let out a low sigh. Let's get a divorce. Since you can't bear to part with Violet, I'll set you free. With a bang, Blake's father smashed the teacup on the ground. Nonsense. If you two get divorced, what will the neighbors think of me? Let her leave. I want to see where she can go without our family. She's still a pregnant woman, and no one will want her in the future. Blake's mother was shouting at me while holding Violet's hand. I glanced at her. Her constant chatter was making my head hurt. Hearing this, Blake thought his mother was right. Yeah. Aurora. Where can you go without us? Don't say such angry words. You have our child in your belly. Don't act impulsively. He reached out to pull me. I stepped back, keeping a distance from him. Child? Do you still delusionally expect me to selflessly carry on the family line for your Blake family and serve your selfish family for a lifetime? Even a slave couldn't be worse off than me, right? I've already had an abortion. Don't even think about it. I took out the abortion report from my bag and threw it to them. Blake's mother rushed to pick it up. After seeing it clearly, her face turned even paler. She covered her chest and scolded me. Aurora. How could you abort my grandson? How? Because the child was in my belly. After saying that, I turned my gaze to Violet, who had just seemed so weak. Since you all want a grandson so much, why not let Violet give birth to one for your family? Aurora. Don't talk nonsense. Violet and I are not what you think. Blake snapped. Oh. I forgot. I seem to have accidentally heard before that Violet can't get pregnant. She really can't give you a child. In my previous life, I had accidentally seen Violet's medical examination report. She looked at me in disbelief. You. How do you know? Blake's mother started wailing. Seeing this, Blake's father and Blake finally really believed I wasn't lying to them. Blake's father snatched the report from his mother. He opened his mouth, and it took him a long time to say, "You really had an abortion." Blake's father was so angry that he slipped and fell to the ground. He kept hitting the ground with his walking stick. What a misfortune for our family. In the midst of this mess, I pulled my suitcase and was about to leave. Blake chased after me and blocked the door. Aurora, stop making a scene. Okay? I can overlook the fact that you had an abortion for now. I was actually amused by his shamelessness. Blake let out a low sigh. Did I really give you too much leeway before, making you so shameless? Now, it's me, Aurora, who wants to divorce you. Not me begging for your forgiveness. I took out a divorce agreement that I had prepared long ago from my bag and threw it to him. I've already signed my name. You sign it as soon as possible too. I don't want to have any more involvement with you or your family. It seemed that only at this moment did he finally realize that I really wanted to divorce him. He blocked my way again. I pushed him away forcefully and cursed. Blake, are you crazy? Didn't you marry me because my mother saved your father? You don't love me at all. What are you pretending for now? Besides, after we get divorced, you and Violet can be together openly. Right? Aurora, you misunderstand. Violet and I are just because she saved my life back then. She has no relatives in this world. I feel responsible for taking good care of her. That's all. Violet chased after us and stood behind him. She happened to hear this. Her face gradually turned pale. Blake turned around and saw her, also frozen in place. Blake, if you admit now that you're a jerk who wants both the present and the future, I might think a little more of you. I sneered. If you don't sign the divorce agreement, I'll file a lawsuit. Don't worry. I will definitely divorce you. Taking this opportunity, I quickly stopped a taxi, got in, and drove away. I found a hotel to stay in temporarily. There were less than half a month left before I left. During these half a month away from the Blake family, I could finally take a good breath and do what I liked. I decided to make up for what I had lost before. So I found an island and decided to go there for a while. After everything was ready, I pulled my luggage and went to the airport. Before getting on the plane, I specifically put all the Blake family members on my blacklist. I couldn't let them ruin my nice vacation. I had a great time on the Isle and for over a week. It was not until I received a call from Professor Hudson that I realized there were only 2 days left before I joined the rescue team. He booked a return ticket for me and asked me to go to the hospital to find him. After I put my luggage in the hotel, I rushed to the hospital without delay. Just as I arrived at the entrance, a hand grabbed me. I turned around and saw it was Blake. When he saw me, surprise filled his eyes. Aurora, it's really you. You have no idea how long I've been looking for you these days. You blocked me, and I couldn't get in touch with you. As he spoke, he lowered his head and forced a bitter smile. I realized that once I couldn't call you, I had no other way to find you. I don't even know if you have any friends. I guess I really didn't care about you enough in the past. I was in a hurry and didn't want to be delayed by him. I shook off his hand. Blake, have you forgotten the divorce agreement I gave you? Stop pretending to be affectionate. You know exactly how you treated me. With that, I lifted my leg and was about to leave. He chased after me. Aurora, give me another chance. Okay? Mom is in the hospital now. I've been taking care of her these days. And I finally understand how hard it was for you to take care of her, and Dad all by yourself whenever they were sick and hospitalized. You were so tired taking care of her. And you still had to rush back in the afternoon to cook for Dad. I realized how difficult it was for you to keep the family in order. I understood what he meant between the lines. Seeing that he had lost a lot of weight compared to before, I guessed that after the free nanny, was gone, all the responsibilities fell on him. And he had suffered a lot. Every word he said seemed to tell me that he couldn't hold on much longer if I didn't come back. I sneered. What? You've been through so much. But doesn't your Violet share any of the burden with you? His face turned cold in an instant. Violet. Violet hasn't been feeling well recently. I nodded. She's really smart. I should have pretended to be sick when I faced such things in the past. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been taken for granted as a free laborer in your family for several years. He was left speechless by my words. But I know you. Look. You're back today. You still can't bear to see me suffer. Aurora. I know you proposed divorce just to vent your anger. I've thought a lot these days. I'll care more about you and take care of you in the future. Can we make up? Come home with me? I couldn't stand it anymore. I shouted at him. Blake. Get away from me. Don't be so self-indulgent. I feel sick at the sight of anyone in your family now. If you still want to keep a bit of dignity, don't block my way. I'm not here for you. Nor for your Blake family. The world doesn't revolve around your family. Whether your parents live or die is up to them. Don't drag me into it. If you have a conscience, take care of them yourself. If not, just leave them on the street. Perhaps because he had never seen me like this before. He was stunned for several minutes. He said in disbelief, Then, what are you doing here at the hospital? Suddenly, as if he thought of something, he let out a sigh of relief. Forget about becoming a doctor. You can't become one just by running to the hospital every day. Suddenly, a solemn voice came from behind. Aurora. Why aren't you coming in? We need to confirm the information one last time before you join the rescue team. I turned around and saw Professor Hudson and his assistant standing behind me. I nodded to him apologetically. I'll come right away. Professor Hudson. Then I turned back and warned Blake. Stay away from me. Don't bother me anymore. Rescue team? What rescue team? He asked. Is it any of your business? I rolled my eyes and then ran towards Professor Hudson. I confirmed the information one last time. Professor Hudson handed me the pass for the medical rescue and said solemnly, Aurora, on behalf of the International Medical Rescue Team, I welcome you to join us. Early the next morning, a young man knocked on the door of my room. He said, Aurora, I'm here to pick you up. I followed him onto the plane. From then on, I started a 3-year medical rescue work in a war-torn Middle Eastern region. During this period, I witnessed countless deaths and miracles of life. Every time I saw a successfully rescued patient, I was glad and grateful that God had given me a chance to live again. And I didn't waste this chance on things that weren't worth it. 3 years later, I received a call from Professor Hudson. He said, There's a chance to study in Germany now. But it will take 4 years. Are you willing to go? I looked at the ruins and the wounded behind me. My current medical skills were not particularly mature. The medical system in Germany was well developed. And I would surely improve a lot after studying there. I nodded and agreed. I'll go. Just as I was about to hang up the phone, he suddenly paused. I was a bit curious. Professor Hudson. Is there something else? Aurora. There's something I've never told you. The day after you left, your ex-husband came to me. He asked me where you had gone. And I told him. He seemed very sad and kept saying things like it was impossible. That you couldn't leave him. He made a scene in my office for a long time and even broke a lot of my things. Finally, he was taken away by a woman named Violet. I thought he was really sad about your departure. But a few months later, he was openly dating that woman. I thought this matter was over. So I didn't want to tell you. But a few days ago, I heard a big piece of news. He suddenly became gossipy. That Violet was arrested. And Blake was suspended from his job. Now he's also been taken away for investigation. Ah? I was astonished. He said slowly. That Violet is a traitor. She approached Blake with a purpose from the very beginning. The whole Blake family was stupidly deceived by her. Blake not only lost his job, but he may also face other penalties in the future. Luckily, you divorced such a fool decisively back then. I recalled that in my previous life. Before I died. This hadn't happened yet. Did Violet succeed in the previous life? I shivered. But fortunately, she was discovered now. As for Blake, He deserved it even more. After handing over my work here, I flew to Germany to start my study abroad life. For years was neither too long nor too short. I lived a fulfilling life every day and indeed learned a lot. On the day I finished my studies, I received an award issued by the college. They told me that I was an excellent doctor. In a blink of an eye, 7 years had passed since I left. Professor Hudson invited me to return to China. He was getting old and said, "Aurora, you're my most outstanding student. I'll be at ease if I hand the hospital over to you." On the first day of my taking office, after the meeting, my assistant took me back to the office. When we passed by the inpatient department, I was suddenly stopped by a familiar voice full of shock. "Aurora?" I turned around and met the surprised face of Blake's mother. "Is it really you?" She was so excited that she wanted to rush over. "Where have you been all these years? Why didn't you contact us? We've been looking for you everywhere." My assistant stopped her. "Ma'am, please don't get excited." But she slapped my assistant's hand away and shouted, "She's my daughter-in-law. What does it have to do with you?" Suddenly, a man in a security uniform ran over from behind her and held her back. "Mom, you just had an operation. You can't get excited." Our eyes met, and I recognized the haggard man as Blake, whom I hadn't seen for 7 years. He recognized me and immediately lowered his hand in a panic and turned around. Blake's mother was still shouting daughter-in-law at me. My assistant stepped forward and interrupted her. "Ma'am, this is our hospital director, not your daughter-in-law. Please behave yourself." Hearing this, Blake stiffly turned around and stared at me. "Aurora, you really became a doctor." I nodded to my assistant, indicating that she didn't need to stop her. I walked up to Blake and reached out my hand. "Long time no see." He was stunned for a few seconds, then forced a bitter smile and reached out his hand. "Long time no see, Director." He sent his mother back to the ward, and we went to a coffee shop outside the hospital. He said that his father had passed away the year before last. At that time, his mother was in the hospital, and he was taken away for investigation. There was only his father at home. He fell down the stairs, and no one noticed. It was a long time before the neighbor noticed something was wrong and called the police. Since then, my mother's health has been getting worse. She had an operation some time ago, but the doctor told me it's hard for her to recover completely. She probably doesn't have much time left. Her mental state is not very good now. Sometimes she's not quite conscious, and she's forgotten a lot of things. That's why she kept calling you daughter-in-law just now. Don't take it to heart." After saying that, he lowered his head and covered his face with his hands. "Aurora, I really regret it. If I had lived a good life with you back then, if I hadn't brought Violet back, would everything be different today?" I picked up the coffee and took a sip. "Blake, le cow. You only regret treating me like that because you're having a hard time now. Essentially, heading fulfill brand sexually. You're not really feeling guilty towards me." With that, I got up and prepared to leave. "If that's the case, I don't think we have anything more to talk about. I've already paid for the coffee." He quickly grabbed me. "That's not true. Aurora, I really feel guilty towards you. I don't have the face to ask for your forgiveness. I asked you to come here today because I wanted to say sorry to you in person." I smiled. "I don't need your apology." Blake let out a low sigh. "Don't think too highly of yourself. After I left you, I realized that there are so many worthwhile things to do in the world. I was so stupid in the past. Being trapped in a small world by you and being satisfied with a little bit of kindness from you. I lost myself in your Blake family. But fortunately, I didn't choose to continue. I've created different surprises for my life." I didn't listen to him anymore and walked out of the coffee shop without looking back. Blake let out a wow sigh. "We're no longer on the same path. Let the past be the past. I'm already embracing a new life." The end.